I'm really happy to be here. He just did basically my introduction, so that's great. Yeah, I'm Joanna, Voight Will. I'm just recently married, so getting used to the new name. I'm the Pollinator Program Coordinator for the Kansas Rural Center. I am a beekeeper, and my background's in environmental sciences with an emphasis in habitat conservation. I think I caught the pollinator bug really early. My dad was a beekeeper, and I helped him out a lot. So I think that was just an amazing experience. I really liked the bees, the honey, all of it. So I've just kind of been really interested in pollinators ever since then. And I feel really lucky to be able to do that work. Sorry. With the Kansas Rural Center. So a little bit about KRC. We're a nonprofit organization founded in 1979. We promote a farm and food system that's environmentally sound, economically viable, and socially just. We do research, education, and advocacy, providing practical farming information along with farm and food policy analysis and calls to action, and advocacy for family farms, local and regional food systems, and local and regional food systems that produce healthy food in a sustainable manner. So biodiversity and functioning ecosystems are really critical to a healthy farm and food system and all of these things that I just mentioned. And pollinators play a really critical role in that, in maintaining biodiversity. Okay. Let's see. So, why are pollinators and how are pollinators so important to biodiversity? Pollinators are what's known as a keystone species. And what that means is that within the ecosystem they live, they have a sort of an inordinately large impact on the ecosystem. So as a keystone species fares, so fares the rest of the ecosystem, kind of. And actually they really have a huge impact. So with pollinators, if they are in decline, the ecosystem is going to kind of rapidly go down. You can go to the next one. This is because over 85% of the flowering plants on the planet require pollination. So if pollinators start to decline, there's a pretty rapid decline in plant diversity, which then impacts a whole, all kinds of species from birds and insects, on up through grizzly bears and people. So they're just pollinators really are at the top of that food chain, as it were, in terms of preserving biodiversity. Okay. When biodiversity declines, ecosystems sort of stop functioning quite as well. And that's really important to us as farmers, but also for really all humans. I've put a list of ecosystem services that we humans and farmers get from healthy functioning ecosystems. And so again, when pollinators decline, these ecosystem services kind of start to drop off and they have pretty big impacts on us. Okay, so who are the pollinators? We're all probably pretty familiar with honeybees, bumblebees, monarchs, and other butterflies, but there are actually over 100,000 species of invertebrate pollinators on the planet. That includes bees, flies, wasps, ants, beetles, and moths. There are over 1,000 species of vertebrate pollinators. There are some birds that are pollinators, some bats are pollinators, a few small mammals, and a few reptiles. And I think that the mammals, I don't think we have those in North America. But there are over 4,000 species of native bees in North America, and that, while I love honeybees and I'm really big on keeping honeybees going and healthy and all that, it's really the native pollinators that are critical to the biodiversity. Honeybees were actually not native to the United States. So while they have great benefits, they're just not a super critical part of our biodiversity. So I'm going to talk today about adding habitat to your farms, and that's going to be largely, that would be for native pollinators. Bees primarily, but really the whole swath. Okay, so why are we talking about pollinators? I'm sure probably most of you are aware, pollinators are declining worldwide at really alarming rates. I think it really got on people's radar in 2006 when a large beekeeper, I think it was Minnesota or Pennsylvania, went out one day and like 500 of his hives or something, all the bees were gone. They weren't dead, they were just gone. So this is like unheard of. And this started happening with some regularity to people. And the phenomenon got termed colony collapse disorder. And to this day, there's still debate about what exactly causes it, but it's pretty certain that there's a range of factors, and that a bunch of those factors stem from our agricultural system. And this is probably a good time to talk about neonicotinoid pesticides, which you guys don't use if you're organic, so that's a positive. But they really skyrocketed in about 2004, and so this dramatic decline in pollinators and the honeybees and others really coincides well with that increase in use of those. So they definitely play some role there, and I'll talk a little bit more about them later. Monarch butterflies have also been declining. That's probably more of a habitat issue, but they, in 2014, had their lowest winter population. There's a migratory group of monarchs, and Kansas and the Midwest it's really important to that migration. They stop, and actually I think in Kansas we even get the first, they leave from Mexico, we get the first generation, some of them lay eggs here, and the second generation goes on up to Canada. But their habitat is really in decline. They have to use milkweed, and a lot of native prairie has been wiped out for agricultural purposes, but also a lot of rangeland that's left, people spray and wipe out the forbs. So they've just got a whole host of problems. That low winter population in 2014 really raised alarm bells. People thought that if it declined anymore, they would probably go extinct. So they are up for listing on the endangered species list. Fish and Wildlife Services, for reasons I don't totally understand, at the end of the year when they would have presented the information that would make the decision, they didn't. And so there's a 3-year, that must have been in, I guess, 2015. But there's a 3-year period that's happening right now where states all along the migratory corridor are coming up with conservation plans. They're being led by the wildlife groups and state parks and stuff like that to try to beef up habitat for monarchs to a point where they don't need to be listed. So I've been involved in working on a state plan to do that. It will be released soon, and it's basically like an all hands on deck, everybody plant milkweeds and do what you can, and then in 2019 we'll see where we are with the monarchs. So, okay, with native bees, half the North American native bees are in decline, and pretty serious decline. 1 in 4 species is imperiled and at risk of extinction. So it's pretty serious deal there. Okay, why are they declining? I've kind of touched on this. Habitat loss, largely due to agriculture. In Kansas, our land is primarily taken up with a huge swath is agricultural fields, and that has had a big impact. Increased use of pesticides, and particularly those neonicotinoids, which I talked about. They are a systemic pesticide on corn and soy and other seeds. The seed is coated with them. And when they first came out, they were touted as kind of environmentally superior to spraying, because the thought was, well, it's on the seed, it'll go up into the plant, and it will just reach the target insects. Well, that hasn't been the case at all. So when they're planted, there's a planting dust that kicks off, and that's highly toxic to a lot of pollinators, and will just kill them immediately. But then also, the pesticide on the seed, only 2 to 20% actually goes up in the plant, leaving the rest to kind of get out into the environment. They're highly water soluble, so they really are moving. They're also highly persistent, so they're sticking around a lot and winding up everywhere. They're found in the drinking water in Iowa and all kinds of wildlife. In the food, somebody did a test of the food at the United States Congress cafeteria, and there were neonicotinoids in like 97% of the food or something. So that's a pretty serious thing. There's some introduced diseases and pests are impacting pollinators. Okay, so let's see, while agriculture, has in some ways sort of helped precipitate, some of the decline with the habitat loss and the pesticides, there's also a really significant opportunity to do really great things for pollinators through agriculture and on your farm, and especially for people like you who are doing organic agriculture. Okay, so what do we need to do if on your farm you want to help pollinators? Pollinators need food, they need nesting sites, and they need to be protected from pesticides and herbicides. And I'll talk more about this later, but 70% of native bees nest in the ground. And so that's pretty significant as you think about it, because things like tillage and stuff do impact their nesting. So I'll talk more about that later, but I just wanted to mention it as we go through. Okay, sorry. So if you are interested in creating or improving pollinator habitat on your farm, I would highly recommend, most of the information that I got is from a group called the Xerces Society for Invertebrate Conservation. They just are a stellar organization and have phenomenal information. A lot of it is available free on their website, or there are books and things that you can buy, but super, super helpful information. Okay, so if you are interested in adding pollinator habitat on your farm, probably the first thing to do, I forgot to say this. So back onto that, for the three things, for the food and shelter and protection from pesticides, there are kind of three avenues to doing that. One is to identify habitat that you have already and protect or preserve or enhance it. You can also modify your farming practices a little bit to be more amenable to pollinators, or you can take areas that are something else and create habitat. Okay, so if you're interested in doing any of these things, probably the first thing to do is to kind of assess the pollinator habitat on your farm. So kind of go out, see what you got, see how the plants in it, do they bloom throughout the whole growing season, that kind of thing. Is there bare soil for nests and that kind of thing. You can also kind of look for places that you might be able to convert to habitat. Some really good places to start looking for habitat or to turn into habitat would be untilled areas. That would be like wooded areas, stream banks, utility easements, conservation areas, and natural areas around buildings. The peripheral areas, your field edges, hedgerows, levees, road edges, and the banks of drainage ditches. Also, if you have any kind of strips, filter strips or insectary plantings, like for beneficial insects, those can be really great for pollinators. You might, if you put them in for beneficial insects, you might want to actually add some plants that are really pollinator specific. Any poor quality or poorly irrigated land is actually really positive, can be really positive for pollinators, because again, with those ground nesting pollinators, they need bare soil that's undisturbed, which a lot of your poor quality land will probably have patches of bare soil. That would just be pretty ideal for some of those bees. Orchards and perennial crops can provide a lot of food. One note about orchards, they are a total boon when they're in bloom, so that's a positive, but then that resource goes away. So if you have orchards, you might want to consider putting cover crops or some good diverse mix cover underneath so that there's more continuous food throughout the year. And also your farm garden is a great resource for pollinators. So a note about habitat. Generally, habitat patches that are larger and close together are better for the bees. It's just an efficiency thing. The more they have to choose from and the closer it is, that's obviously going to be better. However, any habitat is better than none at all. So don't just, if you can, even a flower garden on your porch or whatever is great. Also, within habitat patches, clusters or clumps of flowers are easier, more efficient for the bees than like a really broad mix. I know I get gifts of like pollinator mixes and I plant them, but you're going to get widely dispersed, each species widely dispersed. And while again, that's better than nothing, if you're able to clump a bunch of sunflowers together or whatever, it's just easier for the bees. Okay, so Bees eat only nectar and pollen, and so that's what you're trying to provide. I put a picture here of this book from which I got these native pollinator plants, and I didn't realize when he started talking about Canada, I thought it was maybe more regional, so I don't know where everybody's from, but some of this may not be perfectly applicable. However, this book had, I don't know if it was North America, probably North America, and also the Xerces Society has regional information for all over. So my presentation is a little tailored towards here, but you can certainly find the information. So I just listed some plants that for Kansas are regionally specific that would be excellent pollinator food plants. And up in the left-hand corner there, the Xerces Society calls them bee pastures or bee pasture plants. Basically, they're the cover crops that you might use. These can provide, if you let them flower, really excellent forage for bees. Buckwheat, clover, cowpea, mustard, partridge pea, radish, sweet clover, and vetch. I mean, those are just prime crops for pollinators. So again, if you let those flower, that's a really good thing. I've also listed some native trees and shrubs. Again, those are kind of regionally specific, and wildflowers. So, and a lot of those flowers are just my absolute favorite flowers, so it's like you just can't go wrong adding those. Okay, and the next one, to ensure that you have forage throughout the year, you want to have plants that bloom early, mid, and late. There's a list again from this area of plants that bloom during those times. So, and it's really interesting. I know I'm talking about native bees, but with the honeybees that I have, you really see it. You know, in the spring they go for the clover. In the winter, I have tons of goldenrod and asters, and they make, I don't remember which one it is, but one of those makes a honey that smells and tastes like butterscotch, and so you really know when they've hit it. Some people love it and some people don't like it, but it's really apparent and it's kind of fun. And those late blooming crops are important for all the pollinators because that's what's going to get them through the winter. So those are really important. Okay, so when you're choosing pollinator habitat, you want to choose a wide variety of plants with overlapping bloom times. Native plants are outstanding, and native plants that are specific to your region, obviously. Locally adapted species, and avoid invasive species. In terms of shelter, there are wood nesting, ground nesting, and cavity nesting bees. About 70% of bees are ground nesting, and I tried to put a little picture there. That's some type of a bumblebee nest, which I don't know that I've actually ever even seen one, but it'd be fun to go look. But because so many bees require ground nesting, you need to have bare soil. You also, there's some like mounds of soil can be useful, but that's an important piece. About 30% of bees are wood nesting. They utilize soft pith twigs or like empty stems from elderberry, plants like elderberry, sumac, blackberry, things like that. They also utilize the beetle tunnels in dead trees. So it's good to leave dead trees standing. A very small portion of bees are cavity nesting, and this includes bumblebees. It's the social bees that are cavity nesters, and they tend to use things like small abandoned rodent nests and that kind of thing. So again, just leaving areas, natural areas on your farm, leaving them natural and not cleaning them up can be really beneficial to the bees. Okay, so in terms of things that you can do through your farming practices that might help pollinators, trying to minimize tillage. Again, this protects the ground nesting bees. In lieu of that, or in addition to that, if you leave untilled space around the edges of your crops, that will be helpful. Plant cover crops, and particularly those beneficial to bees, which I mentioned earlier. And then let them flower. That's pretty critical. Plant a diversity of crops, your regular crops. Just diversity is always good for everything, really, but bees also. let plants all over your farm flower whenever possible. Again, cover crops, but your hay fields too, if you can let a portion of those go to flower, that's really good for the bees. And same in your garden. If you let things flower, that's really beneficial. Okay. Oh, and and I kind of talked about the insectary strips and other natural areas. You can kind of assess those and see what species are in them, see, if they bloom throughout the year, and if they seem pretty pollen-rich and nectar-rich, that's fine, but you can also add some of those really great pollinator plants to those kind of strips. And then also just leave areas that support native bees alone as much as possible. In terms of protecting pollinators from pesticides, this is a list of organic approved pesticides. There are some that are highly toxic to bees. There are some that are not toxic at all, and then some kind of in the middle. I got this list from the Xerces, from this, I think it's a pamphlet, Organic Approved Pesticides Minimizing Risk to Bees. So it had a great chart that was color-coded, really easy to read, but also they would have suggestions for if you need to use the really toxic ones, sort of how to use them to minimize damage to the bees. Drift is another thing that can impact pollinators, and I would imagine as organic farmers this is already heavy on your mind in terms of herbicides. Be a lot of the same principles. In pollinator habitat, the one positive that you could have that maybe you wouldn't have with your own crops is you could locate it like way in the middle of your farm away from drift. That's a possibility. Otherwise, you can create barriers to minimize drift blowing in or whatever. But if you do that, be sure to use trees like firs that pollinators are not attracted to, because if you're planting a barrier and they're attracted to it, that's just going backwards. Okay. Oh, and also you could register on DriftWatch. Okay, so I've talked about a little bit about how pollinators, or how we can benefit pollinators, but there's doing some of these practices can also benefit you. Pollinator habitat can double as erosion control if placed appropriately. It can help control weeds if you plant it in weedy areas and really keep a good stand going. Eventually it can supplant that weed seed bed. It supports other wildlife, including beneficial insects like parasitic wasps and predator beetles, which can help with your pest control in your crops. Provides habitat for lots of birds and woodpeckers, which eat a lot of pests. And also, a pollinator-friendly farm can be a good marketing tool. People have been pretty moved by the plight of the pollinators. So, a pollinator-friendly farm, if you there's actually a new certification from the Xerces Society in Oregon Tilth. It's called Be Better Certified. And organic farmers are in great shape for getting that certification. You actually get stickers and stuff to put on your products, or it's labeled Be Better Certified, and that can just be a really a draw for consumers. And I've put a list of resources. If I can post this on the KRC website, but if anybody wants any of these, again, if you go to the Xerces website, most of the resources are on there and really easy to find, but I'd be happy to send anybody anything they want. I also did bring SARE, Sustainable Ag Research and Education, put out a really nice manual on cover cropping for pollinators and beneficial insects, and I have a bunch of those, so I brought those and I'll leave those here. And that's all I have. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Yes. Yes, that was some. Okay. Yeah, that's an excellent point, because yes, and I should have mentioned that. So if you're buying plants, native plants, or any kind of garden plants, or even garden seeds, the neonicotinoids are, a lot of those seeds are, or can be, not a lot, but some are coated with those. And then in a lot of larger particularly larger suppliers of garden plants, they're drenched in neonicotinoids, and so that is a total negative for the bees. You're drawing them in with the flowers, and then it is going to kill them. So you want to use reputable sources that are not using neonic-coated seeds. That's a really... Right. Yeah, well, I don't know what they'll come up with. Yeah. Yes. Yes, yes, they do. And that's an interesting point too, because the neonics are a nicotine, there's a nicotine component there, and unfortunately bees are super attracted to it. So like if there's a bowl of water or a plant or whatever that has neonics versus not, they're gonna go to the one with the neonics. So that's a bummer. In terms of what's next for the garden stores, I don't know how this will go, but next down the pipeline for the agricultural scene is something that I think is even worse than that. It's RNAi. I don't know if any of you have heard of it, but basically they're tampering with, I think the pesticide or whatever will tamper with the DNA of the insects, and so it's like how's that gonna go? It's have all these bugs with these weird genes that's just going to go right on up the food chain. So that is actually even scarier, and is I think do you know any about that, Jack? No, I know Gail Fuller knows about that, but I think that's like slowly and silently getting approved and would not be better. I don't know. I'm sorry. Yeah, I don't know. It's RNAi, so it's like capital R and then I think capital N and then lowercase ai, but it's yeah. So, okay, did you want to? Okay. Okay. Mm-hmm. Oh. Oh. Okay. No, I wasn't aware of that, and that does sound bad. Oh no. Oh no. Yeah, that sounds not. Right. Right. Yeah. That I don't know. That's really right. Yeah. Yeah, that is. I don't know. Yeah, that's just lots of bad news. Oh, okay. Yes, she's from Southwest Kansas and said that there's a wheat virus. Oh, what was the name? What was the name of the Wheat Street Mosaic? And so they're basically encouraging farmers to till not only the fields but like everything around it so it doesn't transfer to the next year or on to other crops. And she asked if there was a strategy for, trying to educate farmers, and I don't know. I don't know. Well, I think the education right now is to tell farmers to do that. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely not a not a positive. Yeah. I mean, the chemicals keep changing because insects and the plants and insects do adapt. I haven't heard that insects are adapting to to neonics, but they will. I mean, that would just be, that's kind of the nature of the game. It would be surprising if they didn't, and that's why there's always the next kind of worst thing on the pike. So. Purchasing bees, where are you from? North. So I think if you can get bees locally, I think that is usually your best bet if you can find a reputable person. And I'm from Northeast Kansas also, and if you actually want to email me, I could give you a list. There's a huge, really healthy community of beekeepers and people who make bees in Northeast Kansas, so that's good. Beyond that, if you order packaged bees, which I've done plenty, sometimes it just turns out that way. Drapers out of Iowa, I think, is good. Let's see, who else? Again, I guess I've ordered them from Heartland Honey, which is Cecil Sweeney and Jolie Weiner in Northeast Kansas, and they actually drive out to California and get them and pick them up. So it's kind of the same, but there are people who are breed them in Kansas, small scale, but yeah. Yes. Okay. That's a really good question, because when I was making my PowerPoint, I saw that, and I actually sprinkle DE around my hives. Small hive beetles have come up into Kansas recently, and I read that was a great, control for that. So, time will tell, but I spent this last season, judiciously sprinkling the earth around my beehives. So that chart said that it was highly toxic. I don't know. It might matter, where it is or what it's on, but I don't know. I need to look into that too, because that concerned me quite a bit. And that reminds me also from the question up here, one really interesting thing is that fungicides, which are considered not harmful to pollinators, they're actually turning out, they're starting to think that they are, in combination with other things, that they are really contributing to the problem. So it's a weird mixture, but there's a synergy there that's really bad for the bees. So that's one thing where it's like you thought, oh, it's no problem, but it adds to the problem. So, yeah.
In this region, do you have issues with the mites in the bees, like California experienced back in the 80s and 90s?
Yeah, so I was young when my dad was keeping bees when those first came through, and they just wiped people out, and worse, they wiped out the wild colonies of bees, I think. So people rebounded, definitely, chemical heavy treatments there. And when I first started keeping bees, I thought, oh my gosh, I have to use this miticide and stuff. And then I've stopped. So for me personally, I'm really small scale, like 5 hives, but I don't treat for mites. I use natural treatments. I use screen bottom boards year round. And then once every couple years, I put, I think it's called, I have to be careful with the name because there's one that's toxic and one that's totally natural, but it's like Apivare Life or something like that, and I get it from Brushy Mountain Bee Company, and it's basically a little kind of sponge soaked in Thymol, like thyme oil or something, and if you shut up your hive on a warm day, it kind of smokes out the mites but doesn't hurt the bees. It will make your honey taste a little timey, so, but I've had then, my bees have mites but not to a problem, so. And bees are so complicated. I also don't worry much because I'm not a honey producer and trying to make a lot of money. It doesn't really bother me if my bees swarm. I'm not sure you can really control it anyways. But some people think that is helpful in controlling the mites. If you get a huge population of bees in the summer, you're also going to get a huge population of mites. And then when things kind of die down in the winter, it's like the mites are bigger than the bee population, and that can be a problem. So there's a lot of things. But people, I'm a little I would say the majority of beekeepers, sort of conventional, definitely use miticides. So, and again, I'm not trying to make a living from it, and I don't have a ton of hives, but the natural stuff has worked fine for me. So, yeah. Yeah.
One time years ago, there was a fellow, I think it was Persian, I was talking to him,
Okay.
Jesuit, worked at that area.
Uh-huh.
He worked with bees a long time, and we were discussing this recently.
Yeah.
And I think he had, you know how gardens work, vinegar,
Mm-hmm.
fertilizer.
Yes.
I think he had some natural leaves
Oh.
of a plant that he used, like you would use garlic or vinegar.
Yeah.
They're places to grow a lot of that.
Yeah.
And I had some of this stuff. What do we do?
Oh.
This person, he had a system that he thought worked, because
Okay.
he had a lot of experience that he was like,
Yeah.
and I don't remember what it was.
That's,
Some type of leaf,
yeah.
from this area in Kentucky,
Okay.
that he said, I would be able to.
I haven't heard of it, but that would, that would make sense to me, because I think like the one that I used was thyme, but I don't know why that would be the only thing. And I do think there are a lot of natural, remedies that would work great. So yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really, yeah. Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's a fun thing if you're not, overly worried about it. The bees are so complicated and so interesting. I mean, it's really, I think, good to try things and see what works, and then always your own personal experience is going to dictate. I mean, it's, I know what works for me, and it really works. So that's fun. I'll have to research that when I get home, because that sounds really interesting. It'd be a really good one. Yes.
Back to your comment on the research by Nina what about research led by Jonathan Lundgren from
Jonathan, I don't know if Jonathan, he's the one who, he was working for the USDA, and he was studying the neonicotinoids. And he basically got kind of run out because he was a little too open about the impacts. I don't know if he's researching RNAi. Maybe so, because I got that information from Gail Fuller, who gets all of his information from Jonathan. But definitely he is talking about it and very, very worried about it. So I'm sure he probably is researching it at his farm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and if you don't know about him, it's Jonathan Lundgren. He runs a nonprofit now. He's just an independent scientist. His nonprofit is Ecdysis, ECDYSIS, and his farm is Blue Dasher Farm. It's up in South Dakota. He's doing really neat, great research on the pesticides, and he's really into just regenerative agriculture and sort of, promoting all of this. So. And he's keeping bees, which is new to him, and it's kind of interesting. And he's had hard luck, so he'll learn new things and have information there in coming years. So, and that's kind of an interesting thing, because he started with a whole bunch of hives, and so I think that some of these problems in like colony collapse disorder. Some of the problems would also be chalked up to, I think, and this is just me talking, but to scale. So, I mean, those original beekeepers, it was very large scale. They were trucking their bees, from the Dakotas or Pennsylvania, to California or, down south. I think that is a hard lifestyle on bees. They don't eat their own honey, and it's a single crop, and so that's kind of a weird, not particularly sustainable thing either. But it had a big impact because basically in the last few years, everybody's worried about having enough bees to pollinate the almonds. So because basically at this point, the big beekeepers lose about half their bees every year and have to start fresh, and that's not sustainable for them. So it's tough. But these are things where I think like backyard beekeepers and can be really important in the equation, and people just on any scale doing things. I think that's really, you really help the system in whatever way, and like you guys are all doing with your farming. So. Yeah? Um, no, I'm not really super expert on this, but I will say I know that even crops that don't require pollination generally benefit from pollination. And for like the kind of farming that you're doing, definitely the native pollinators would be the ones. I'm not 100% sure about bumblebees, but just bees in general. I mean, things like even like tomatoes that again don't really require pollination. The yields are much higher. I think I've heard. I think things like soybeans that are near, I can't remember now if it was honeybees or really natural areas, the yields are higher. I think coffee plants do better, which is important to me. No one's growing coffee, but that one sticks out.
Traditionally in our beekeeping, focus, they focus very
Yes,
bumblebees do be very
yes, yes. Yes, yeah, and I think on the clovers, I gotta look to be sure. Where was my note on? I think red clover. Red clover is interesting because I think it has a long. They have to have kind of a long proboscis to get to it. But yeah, it's definitely one of the ones that is considered super good. I think I thought that honeybees couldn't pollinate clover, but I think they can. But definitely is that right? You think they cannot? They're not long enough, so it must be the bumblebees. Okay, yeah, yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm. Y- Yes. Oh, dandelions are in this area, really dandelions in yards and on farms, and then henbit out in the farm fields. That's going to be one of the very first nectar resources, so they're hugely, hugely important. So, yeah, so I'm huge on let the dandelions go for sure. And henbit too. I mean, you see these beautiful fields of purple in the fallow fields, and I'm like, just let it be, and then they always come till it. But and mowing's a big thing, in roadside ditches and stuff. They sweet clover. I mean, a lot where I live. A lot of beautiful, beautiful native flowers and grasses are in the ditches, and if those cannot be mowed, those are outstanding habitat. So, and like in that monarch conservation plan, things like that are really factored in because those marginal areas really can be a good habitat reservoir for all species like that. And people used to, for a while, people would get really sort of contentious about what habitat, the specific requirements. I think things are bad enough now that people are like at the monarch thing, they're like, let's just do it. Let's do habitat. It's going to benefit, a range of species, and let's not like worry too specifically. So, which is probably good. But even things like, the prairie chicken habitat, there's going to be benefits for pollinators and that kind of thing too. So even if it's not super specific to it. But, yep. Okay, good. Yeah, I don't know if you can. I will say, well, bumblebees. Honeybees are notoriously, and I would say probably bumblebees too. It just hurts worse to get stung by a bumblebee. But honeybees for sure are usually just going to be going completely about their business. So on the bumblebees, yeah, I think if they're cognizant, it seems like most people like step on a bumblebee in the garden or something like that. I think as long as they're flying, it's fine. Are they allergic or do you know? Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. Right. I know that's tricky. I don't yeah, I don't know, sorry. Maybe if you can see where their nests are, and maybe trying to create a similar habitat close by, but I have no idea, really. Yeah. Yeah, I know. Yeah. Yeah, that's, mhm. Oh, oh my gosh. That you were, okay, yeah. Yes. Oh, that's interesting. That was a really impressive migration this year. Wow. Yeah. Well, that's neat. That's really neat to know. Yeah. It's good. Yeah. Oh, yes. That was a whole thing that I forgot to mention. Yes. If you want to put in pollinator habitat, definitely go for the programs. NRCS is fantastic. I've done the CSP, and it's really great, and you actually get rewarded, or at least when I was doing it, you get rewarded for conservation practices you're already doing, which is great, and the pollinator pays high. Does EQIP also? Yeah, and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services also have money and cost share, so those are really, yes, I'm so glad you mentioned that. That's, yeah, it was somewhere in my notes, but yeah, really, really a good way to go, and lots of knowledgeable people who are eager to help, so, yeah. Right. Oh, they are for CSP? Oh, are they? Oh my gosh. Okay. Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah. Iowa's way ahead on the roadside habitat. You guys have been really on the ball on that for years, so that's neat. Mhm. Okay, yeah? I'm sure they do pollinate, and the ones like carpenter bees and stuff that go in, yes, I'm sure they are probably fabulous pollinators. I know they get in people's houses, and it's kind of a problem, but they're, yeah. And that's an interesting thing, because I I just moved, but I had lived on 30 acres, and we had really nice, native prairie and forbs, and it was just thrumming with all kinds of pollinators. So, kind of depending where you are, and those places are probably real havens for the pollinators, but boy, I would see a beautiful, diverse array. But again, that's where, if you have the habitat, I think they will come. So, mhm. Yeah. Yes. Oh. Oh, neat. Okay. Yes. Okay. Nice. Okay. 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 The rusty patch bumblebee. Yeah. Okay. Oh, nice. Okay. Oh. Okay. Oh my gosh. Oh, that's so neat. That's really fun. And because I've sometimes tried to identify bees, I take a lot of pictures and I'll go back, and there are so many bees. I think, oh, this is a really unique one and it's huge. And get nowhere with identifying. So that's so neat to be able to send in a. Oh, okay. Oh, that's really neat. Okay. Oh, that's really cool. That's great. That's good to know about, yeah. And that, yeah, I think that, and people are interested in knowing that you're bee friendly. Anything else? Well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. I always love talking about pollinators.